Yeah, my name's Harvey Klyce. I'm from Mill Valley, California. I'm a sixth generation Mill Valley. Yeah, my great-great-grandfather was the mayor. I guess I would define myself as from Marin County. I always call myself the Californian American.
Yeah.
I've been here long enough not to have any other identity. But when I'm really pushed, I call myself a Northern European mutt, because I'm a mix of all the Northern European countries. Ireland, Scandinavia, Germany. Yeah, I guess when I was a child, I always wanted to be an astronaut. So one of these lofty goals, where I get up at 4 in the morning and watch the space shuttle launch. And so I always wanted to fly. And so that was my motive. So I was in the Navy. I was an officer in the Navy, went to the U.S. Naval Academy, and did about 8 years of active duty, and then another 6 years in the reserves before I got out. They were asking questions like, if you were ordered to drop a nuclear bomb on Moscow, would you? Right, so as a 17-year-old kid, you're getting asked that question, and you're trying to project what answer you think they want to hear. And so I guess the answer I gave them is, if it was lawful, I would have to. I guess I believe in good. I can't necessarily say I believe in anything much more than that, but I believe in good or the presence of good. And beyond that, it gets too complicated. I graduated, I had selected aviation, went to Pensacola, Florida, and ended up in a fixed-wing aircraft pipeline as an NFO, which is a naval flight officer. So it's the mission specialist. Ended up in being trained in electronic warfare and electronic reconnaissance. So the process really was, as I graduated, I went to France for 6 months to study French in Montpellier, Grenoble, and Paris, and then went to flight school, went to some specialty schools, and then I ended up in my squadron. And my first squadron was based out of the south of Spain in a town called Rota. So I spent 4 years there. About half the time was flying out of Greece, because it was during the Bosnian conflict. So we would detach for 6 months at a time, or not 6 months, sorry, 3 to 6 weeks at a time to Sudobe, Greece, and then from there go support NATO operations in Bosnia. Americans and Europeans think that we're very different. But you think the populations of both countries is maybe 700-800 million people, right? In the context of a world of say 7 billion, that's 1 in 7. And then if you go live in the part of the world, like I spent 4.5 years in the Middle East, based out of Dubai, you find that they look at us all as the same. If you're from the U.S. or Europe, they would view you as from the same tribe. Yeah, so we'd fly to Bosnia, and then we'd run missions overland Bosnia. So we would be, basically I called it, burning holes in the sky, collecting, reconnaissance information, and then going home and having living in a beach hotel in Greece. It's also a profession where you have lots of people that die, right? So I don't know many other 20-year-old kids that know a lot of people that have died that they were close to. Typically that happens to people when they're in their 70s, or at some point when they're older in life, maybe in their 50s. You talk about parents and uncles and aunts, but it's typically not associated in society often with friends dying in your 20s. So you always wonder what that does to a person, right? They call it sort of a surreal experience, right? Because you get to watch a war all day, and then you go home and you have a beer on the beach. A lot of what we did was like to prevent some of the NATO aircraft from being shot down by trying to identify threats and such. At the time, it was largely C-130s dropping food in Sarajevo that people were trying to shoot down. And I had a couple guys working for me that grew up in Detroit, and I was asking this one guy, why, and how did he end up in the Navy? And he goes, well, it was 5 o'clock in the morning one day, and I was at the bus stop, and somebody put a gun to my head and took my shoes. And so he said, I figured that, I walked barefoot straight to the recruiter's station and waited for them to open and enlisted. I guess what else can I say? I think the other big shock for me was getting into the business world and having somebody look me straight in the eye, promise that they were going to do something, and then a week later not do it. In the military, I hadn't had many experiences like that. Typically in the military, if someone looked you in the eye, shook your hand, said they're going to do something, it happened. I think America's always been a nation about commerce as well. I think worldwide, it's about enforcing the rules of commerce so we can make money. mean, I think we can all talk about lots of things. I think it was always about, rights and commerce, and I think that was it. Promoting an agenda for both. Yeah, I mean, I think it's a great network. I think every job I've ever had has been the result of networking, and almost all of that through Navy connections. Always. From the time I got out, every job I've had has been through an introduction that came out of that network. I mean, there's an occasional time that and I can get emotional or I can get sad, but mostly I don't really think so. Then again, I was always a little bit removed for the most part. I mean, I was always the guy that was in the air or watching or reporting on, with a few exceptions. I think that the real thing to think about, it was a dialogue, I think, for some of these guys, that if you compare the average combat that somebody saw in World War II to the average combat somebody sees today, it's huge. I mean, I think like an average soldier in World War II, I want to say it was like 3 weeks or 4 weeks of combat. And these guys today are seeing 270 days or in a year. I remember being in the 80s, going to the Naval Academy and going to a Christmas dinner party and having some of these leftover hippies in the area, and nothing against hippies, but calling me baby killer, right? And I'm a 21-year-old kid, and they're calling me baby killer, and I'm in basically a university still, right? And just really aggressive and in your face kind of stuff. And then today the attitude is, everyone thanks you for your service. So that's a big difference in sort of behavior, from being, verbally assaulted for your choices to being verbally thanked. So that's interesting. You can create a system where people are protected and don't need to be violent to take care of themselves or the ones they love about. Yes. I think the challenge is that a lot of places in the world haven't created those sorts of systems yet, so the people have very limited options with regards to how they protect themselves and the people they care about, and so they resort to violence. If you throw education on top of that, it can be misguided. I think another really interesting thing to think about is the rule of law. I mean, Western world is very driven by case law. I mean, everybody's equal under the rule of law, right? Whereas in the Sharia, in the Muslim world, it's all very dependent on the situations around it. So two people who do the exact same thing can get very different punishments because of the mitigating circumstances of the crime, which is very different from Western law. The whole military experience was never about money. Everything you do is about some sort of, it's about control, it's about social good, it's about, most of my career was about protecting people that, or feeding people that were going to get killed by aggressors, which was an interesting, perspective. When you go in and take control to feed people, are you the aggressor or not the aggressor, right? It's a very interesting conversation. I guess it all depends on what side you're on. And at some level, when it gets violent enough, everybody's wrong.